Okay, we are live.
Good morning, America.
We are live, the fuck F, and we're going to be talking about.
So I'm looking for the link, Zach, and I'm not seeing it.
Are you?
Here we go. Got it.
Is that offending you?
I am horribly offended.
Okay, well, because what we're going to be talking about today.
We are live.
That echo is offending me.
Well, I'm vicariously offended for all of you, so deal with that. Okay, we're good.
All right. So, welcome to the PARADIALECTIC podcast. I'm here with Chris Orozco, Shadow Integration Aficionado, Coach, great meme maker.
Thank you.
And also Eric Miller, PhD, clinical psychologist.
Hello.
And we are talking about today, why it may be better for you as an individual to take steps to perhaps achieve unoffendability as opposed to hoping or working to make the world less offensive. Because the latter one, I'm not sure if an unoffendable world is coming.
Or possible.
Oh, possible.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if an inoffensive world is possible.
Especially if people are being authentic and have different opinions and are expressing those opinions to people who have different values, as will tend to happen because people are unique.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so unless we achieve absolute homodoxy, homogeneousness worldwide and lock it in forever, there's probably going to be some offensive expressions and billboards and pop-up
even
ads.
the existence of multiple religions is offensive to people. So like in an inoffensive world, you can't even have two different religions. You can only have the one, and everybody would have to agree on it completely and wholeheartedly.
Aren't we gonna? Is it not? Should we not just be trying to achieve that then?
Again, I don't know if that would be an ideal. So,
well, the interesting thing about it is if we were to genuinely embrace the kind of integrative non-offendability that we're talking about here, that might actually be the quickest path to that.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean?
Well, if we were all integrating everything that offended us and we were becoming more whole, and if enough of us were to adopt that, then eventually the differences between us would stop mattering, and we'd probably all start to see the connections, and then maybe we would form one religion, and maybe we'd realize we don't need all the other ones. Like, that's what I got out of it.
So for the sake of the audience, part of the reason why we're doing this particular podcast is because, Chris, I was seeing from your posts on social media about the concept of unoffendability, and I found it really resonated with what I found when I kind of came across parts work this summer. And what you do is you do shadow work, you do parts work, and this is where this concept of, for you, it sounds like, of unoffendability, it came out of. So for our audience who might not be familiar with parts work or shadow work, why don't we introduce that first? Because again, I really think that this ties in, but I don't just think, it does tie into the whole nature of our podcast, which is PARADIALECTIC. And what we're talking about for PARADIALECTIC is Zach and I were realizing that the 2 points of view that is possible for us to have on any particular topic, it's important to be able to hold them both. So this idea of both fuck the police and we need the police, like those can exist in us simultaneously, and it's that conversation between us, within us, and in the community around us that's important. We don't want either side to win. Like if it's all police, a police state everywhere, that's bad. And if there's absolutely no police, then it's the guy with the biggest muscles and the lowest conscience that runs the block. So it's that conversation, that back and forth, that's important, and that's kind of what happens with shadow work. Am I correct?
Yeah, 100%. Great intro. So basically, this came to me because I've been practicing shadow work and parts work on myself for about 10 years. I've been teaching it for about 7. And one of the things that I noticed is when I would get offended by something, or if I would get hurt by something or upset by something, it was always some part of me that was holding on to a negative idea about myself or about the world that wasn't serving me, that was making me suffer in some either direct or indirect way. And then as I addressed whatever internal suffering I was dealing with, the offense goes away. And so it's almost as if offense and upset is an indicator that you were already hurting and somebody touched it.
And so this was a big parallel for me as well. So I've been dealing with, my kind of background is mindfulness. I've been practicing Zen and mindfulness practices since I was 16. It kind of doubled down on it in my 20s. And that's kind of the center of how I do psychology. It's called acceptance commitment therapy and dialectical behavior therapy. And these are mindfulness-based therapies. And what was amazing is I could see these different parts of myself. I could see these different aspects of myself, but I was trained to view them as things that happen in the background. And they're things that you're aware of, but you don't interact with. In fact, the way that I dealt with the social anxiety I've had for much of my life is to be aware of it, non-judgmentally, to accept it, to make room for it. And the thing was, it was always there. And then I built coping strategies over that. I got in good with the community. I found good friends who I could be somewhere with, and maybe have a partner who I was confident to have by my side. And I've often referred to it as building the subdivision over the Native American burial ground. I knew it was there. I knew the anxiety was there, but I've always been taught from the mindfulness to just ignore the ghosts. Well, eventually, when I was offended by somebody 2 years ago in a very deep, deep way that goes back to stuff that bothered me from when I was a teenager, when I was a kid, that all of a sudden those wounds were raw and the mindfulness wasn't enough for me anymore. And so that's kind of what led me to parts work. And when the parts work happened, it kind of exercised those ghosts. So how do you help people do that? Oh, sorry, Chris, Zach wants to say something.
I just wanted to say that there's also a dialectic there of that effort to make, say, a certain social circumstance or forum or event less like offensive by reflex, so that it's actually going to like push people away or have like this like a certain amount of people not even be able to approach it. Like there's certain situations where that's called for, and then there's certain situations where we don't even want to do that at all. And I think a great example is like Theater Bazaar. There are people who walk into they walk into Theater Bazaar, they walk through the entrance. I've seen people get so scared and offended and just want to leave immediately, even though they spent $90. And Theater Bazaar making any effort to be less offensive to that person, I am so not in favor of that. I think that person would help them to be less offendable. But I host open mics and like situations where we want people to vulnerably share about their emotions and stuff. I think that sometimes my making an effort to make things less offensive by design, sometimes it makes sense. I'm just saying it's not like one or the other. Become unoffendable and let the world become a place where we're all total dicks to each other all the time. But it is important to note the world will not become significantly less dickish fast.
Well, I'd like to say that I'm still very offendable. Like I've just started doing this parts work, this shadow work myself in the last 6 months. I'm coming out of that other paradigm. And I don't know if I ever want to be completely unoffendable. I mean, I can still be mindful around the pain. Me being offended lets me know that there is a conflict there. There is a judgment from another person that matters to me, because on a certain level, my reputation does matter. If people are slandering my name in a way that impacts friendships or people that I care about, I want to be bothered by that. I don't want to ignore that, because on a certain level that matters. But at the same time, I'm really kind of curious. It seems almost to me like this is a resiliency, maybe not a complete unoffendability, but more of a resiliency that is a byproduct of this parts work. So I'm kind of curious, Chris, like, how do you go into parts work with people, and how does this kind of unoffendability or this resiliency come out as a result?
Great question. So, I mean, just the first thing I want to say is that, like, it's my belief and my practice. I hold this belief in my philosophy that I can't be offended by anything I don't already believe. So if I'm offended or hurt by something, it's pointing me to the fact that at some level, I already believe it. And so for me, the idea of unoffendability is the idea of anytime I get offended or upset, that's just going to point me back to something I believe about myself already. And then if I can clean that up, then instead of getting offended, I can still deal with somebody slandering me. I can still protect myself. I can still take care of myself. I can do all that stuff, but I can do it without ever getting upset. I can do it without projecting anything onto the other person. And I can do it while even having some compassion and understanding. Like, what the fuck? Like, why would you do something like this? It takes a weird person to want to do something like that. And after you integrate it, that's what it ends up looking like. It's like, God, that's a weird thing to do. Instead of getting angry, it's just like, God, what? That's where your head's at? Like, that's bizarre.
Tell me if you think that this is right. I'm thinking that like the metaphor for robust versus anti-fragile system is like it's robust to not be super offendable, or to just like to achieve unoffendability. That's a robust system. But what anti-fragile would be is that every time something does offend you, you immediately become inquisitive of what's going on, what's going on in me, where this person holding this belief or saying that upsets me. I have a good anecdote of that. But did you have you had a question for Chris?
No. I think I'm curious to hear your anecdote.
When I was preteen and teenager, I discovered that my father that I was half Jewish. Actually, recently, my mother did an ancestry.com and found out that there's a tiny bit from her as well, making me qualify in some circles as a more bona fide Jew. Anyway, there was a series of years where I like really took that as I really wanted to identify with it. I didn't want to do the hard parts. I didn't want to learn Hebrew and become bar mitzvah, but I wanted Hanukkah, and I wanted to have like to identify as Jewish-ish. And I would go to Harpo's concert theater at in Detroit, and I don't know if it still exists. It was a specifically like heavy fucking metal venue in Detroit that for a series of years, and when I was going there as a teenager, it was ran by bikers and sort of skinheady, maybe straight up skinhead. Like there were Nazis there. There were people who thought they were Nazis there and had tattoos and wore the merch and stuff.
The merch.
And so I then would shave my head and had a goatee not as a teenager, but. And maybe it was later than that. Anyway, I remember I would have my head shaved and had some facial hair coming in. So it must have been. Anyway, I look, similar to how I do now, which some people will see that and be like, oh, American History X, like it looks like I was a shaved head, white looking guy, and I would have people with swastika patches or tattoos salute me. And the first time or two that happened, I remember it happened a few times. It's just like, oh, there they are, thinking I'm one of them, sort of thing. And it became a thing like, what do I wear? Do I have to have a rainbow or something? Do I want to be on the opposite end of their acceptance? Like, because I've never been a physically imposing person or like good at violence. Anyway, I would have these times where somebody would think I'm one of them because I'm the way my fucking hairdo was. And the first time, it definitely offended me. It was like, I'm so not the fuck that. Fuck it, like, shit, man. Do I have to fucking have a different hairstyle so that people don't think that I'm fuck? And I think that I remember a time where it bothered the shit out of me. And then I remembered, like, I'm coming to this place. I like to see metal shows. Okay, there's some people who are down with some shit that I think is fucking super stupid and nonsense. But does it do me any good to have that reaction of something that's probably going to happen again, And I remember a time where it happened, and I just kind of like I had come to terms with the fact that this is a person I've learned more about this, and I think I was aware of it at that time, is that this is not a This is not a person whose life is going well, who is like a well-adjusted person who just happened to gravitate towards a fucking hate group. It's probably somebody who's having a shit life because they're attracted to a shit thing. And I remember one person, saluted and he even said something anti-Semitic. He was just like said something about Jews, and I was like, and he was not physically imposing. I remember being like, I'm actually, my father is that I kind of am Jewish, and he was just like, oh, huh? And it was just like this thing of just this moment of like there was nothing. It just like showed to me that this is a person who just is exactly what I think of people who are down with that sort of stuff. It's like you're just putting some intellectual technology, so even to use the word intellectual, like on your own pain. This is about you.
And I think this is the flip. I think this is the flip side of not doing this kind of self-exploration, self-work that we're talking about to become unoffendable, is that the more that you have these parts of yourself that you're not aware of, the more that you have this emotion that's just hurting and is from the past that you haven't worked with, that the more you're likely to project that onto other people, because you're not curious about the world. You're going, oh, that person looks this way, so they're this thing. And this is how projection happens. And whether that's negative projection, or it's in the case of this guy, he thought it was positive projection. He's like, hey, I'm a skinhead. You must be down. You have a shaved head. You're on my side. You're a good guy. But that's still projection. And it's because he's looking for something that he wants to be true in himself in the outside world, and he's putting it out there instead of being curious about it.
Yeah, right? He was like when I learned to see it as probably the exact movie American History X probably had a lot to do with my realizing this. When I started viewing that person or whoever did that, me or give me that nod, as a hurt person wanting to hurt people, but more so like as someone striving for community, reaching so far for community that they're willing to identify with this thing. Because I was kind of the same way there was a time where I was into ICP, Twisted, Juggalo, Psychopathic Records. And I look back now, it's like, what was attractive about that to me? It made me really unattractive to people I wanted to leave me the fuck alone. Mm-hmm. It was a way to fly a flag of, I'm spiky, stay away from me, and also gave me community with people who were also into that, a small, intimate community that made me feel unique and special. Yeah.
So unoffendability, we can't just say that's a good idea and then embody it. That's not how like these ideas work. It's just like saying, hey, if you're feeling bad, just get over it. There has to be a process involved. And so for me, part of the fact that I realized I was projecting my fears onto other people in this one area of my life. I wasn't doing it most places, but there's this section of my life where I still had unresolved shit that it was happening with. And this is in part what led me to parts work. And by parts work, I meant I was aware of my internal world through mindfulness. And when I listened to Naval Ravikant's interview on Tim Ferriss, I realized that what Naval was likely doing wasn't just this passive mindfulness where you step back in your lotus position and you allow the thoughts to move unimpeded through his mind. I realized that he was hanging out with parts of himself, that he was treating these like friends. He was joking. They were giving him shit. They were supporting him. He was supporting them. And they were actually having a conversation and learning. And I'm like, holy shit, I could try that. And I did. And it was fucking revolutionary to me. And so it was the process of noticing these parts of me that were hurt and actually like sitting down in a non-self-conscious, non-ironic way, having a conversation with that part of myself and believing that it could have the ability to learn and grow. And that it wasn't something that, it wasn't even like shadow work in the way that some people talk about it, where it's like, oh, you solve it and then it's gone and it's no longer there. Like, to me, those parts are stronger in me than they used to be. They're just healthier. And because of that, a side effect was, I wasn't as offended. I wasn't as anxious. And I didn't have to even use mindfulness to make room for that anxiety. So Chris, I'm kind of curious, how did you discover that you were becoming more unoffendable, and how did you do that work in yourself? Because it sounds like you've come at parts work a little differently than I have.
Yeah, I mean, I did it to save my life. Like I was about ready to end my life. And then I found parts work and that was my way out. I was like, holy shit. Okay. So like I can get healthy. If I just treat myself differently and get to know the different parts of myself and help them out, I can actually get healthy. Like, okay. That's my light at the end of the tunnel. I'm going to dig into it. And that was all fine and well. And there wasn't really much that was going to offend me at the time. But then 2016 rolls around. And that's when all the shit hits the fan emotionally and culturally. And I was living in San Francisco at the time. I was dating this like hardcore feminist girl. And I have that balanced view, or what I consider to be a balanced view, where it's like, hey, you know, like I know you don't really like these people that much, but if you try and shut them up, you're going to make them worse. And so that was offending everybody that I knew. And they were saying a bunch of things to me that were really hard to hear. And I was getting offended, and I was getting hurt, and I was getting upset. And so that was like a good 3-year trial and error period of me being like, guys, I have to teach you about what happens when you repress the darkest, most dangerous parts of yourself or anyone else. Like I have to teach you about that. And yet I couldn't seem to do it in a way that wouldn't offend other people. And I found because the reason for that was because I was holding their offense in my head as I was writing, and I was like protecting myself against it as I was writing. I was like pre-offended and writing and describing what my thoughts from a pre-offended perspective. And so I had to take a look at that, and I was like, okay, so I'm adding landmines in my writing because they've gotten to me. So now I'm feeding into the dynamic.
That was very much my experience as well, is that I realized, again, in situations where people, I would kind of guess someone might think a certain way about me because I was in this state, this emotion was strong in me, and it's what we call emotional reasoning. If there's a powerful feeling, that the thoughts that go along with it feel like they're true. The emotions become the evidence for the thing. And I'm aware of this. I mean, this is my job. So my mindfulness would save me from it, but it wouldn't free me from it. And that's where I kind of noticed I was doing the same thing. And that's what helped Heart's work click for me. So if the audience was to do this, if the audience was kind of to look for this in themselves and kind of wonder how to become less offendable by recognizing the parts of themselves that were becoming pre-offended, becoming hurt, or just were ready for that hurt, how would you kind of in a light way maybe guide them towards that?
Yeah. So, well, first I want to finish that thought real quick, because the marvelous thing that I noticed about dealing with my own triggers and offenses when it came to this dynamic of trying to educate people is when I integrated mine, which I'll go into what that means. I found that I could express myself without offending people. Because I wasn't bringing my offense into it. And I already knew what types of things they would get offended by, and they didn't bother me anymore. So instead, as I'm writing, I can just say, oh, that's probably going to offend somebody. And then I go, and it'll offend them for this reason. And I can have compassion for that, and so I can address that in my writing. So I'm disarming the bombs because I know what they are, because they used to hurt me. And so now that they don't hurt me anymore, they're signposts to say, hey, people could mishear you, or people could misunderstand you. And so it's like, cool, you're right. You're absolutely, and it's kind of like that dynamic that you're talking about of like, they can talk to you and help you out and stuff. And that's what it is. They used to be offense, but now they're just like, hey, you could say that better. Like you could reach more people if you say that different. So that's great.
That last part is the reason why I think that self-adjusting to be less predictably offensive to the point where you lose giving the lesson that is inside what will be perceived as a spiky Trojan horse that some people won't wait for the prize that's inside. Bad metaphor, because they hopped out and killed everyone. Like there's times where I notice that, all right, I know who's gonna hear this wrong, and if I can adjust and be sneaky or tricky or more honest, I observe it sometimes as being more honest, because it's like, what do I want you to hear? Like, is my goal to offend? Well, if I have a pre-awareness that I'm going to cause people to just shut me off and not listen for the important part, because as I notice that happens for me a lot. Like, how much will I watch a video if its title is "I hate men because," but that something that is delivering. I'm not sure if there would be any like pearls of wisdom in somebody who would title their video that, but like there is a pearl of wisdom in like hashtag all men are trash, which is, why do people think that? Why do people feel that way? And there's something important to listen to whenever there's anybody who has something that has made them upset. Like, why is someone hurt is an important thing to learn, I find. Because it's the same question of, why do I hurt? Why does it used to offend me a ton when I would be falsely accused of being a dangerous man. And I realized that the thing that was offensive is that, well, one part of it is that there is a nugget of truth of that. I have weaponizable genitals. There's something primal in me just as a human that can be dangerous, And
weaponizable genitals.
Weaponizable genitals, yeah.
That's a punk band if I ever heard it.
So I think that kind of comes to an interesting point, which is, how do we internalize this pre-offendability that actually becomes offensive? So I think it's that what you're kind of hinting at here, Zach, is that there's this dynamic. There's, on one end, men in this day and age are told that being an asshole, being rude, being crossing boundaries, these other things, that these are wrong, bad, harmful, toxic. So many of the young men trying to be good men, which I think leads to the problem, when you're trying to be good instead of living authentically by your values, all of a sudden you're trying to be non-offensive. And now there's been that big meme about how offensive nice guys are, because they can't ask for what they really want. And so they're trying to be nice. They're trying to follow that romantic script of, you do nice things and you're a kind person, and then the woman will recognize your value and then she will be attracted to you. Well, she's attracted to you, but as a friend, not on a sexual level, because you're not exuding any sexuality. But if you go too far to this other end and you are offensively sexual, then that is what is possibly criminally a problem. Whereas that middle ground, where you own the fact that you're sexually attracted to somebody, you own the fact that you are a man, you own the fact that you are nice, but you're not being nice because you're trying to get something, and you have a real authentic connection with somebody, that's the real middle ground. But as long as you're trying to be non-offensive, you're going to be offensive.
Yeah, and you run the risk of causing a lot of problems, because especially for guys, like the part of us that can do the offensive thing, the part of us that is essentially potentially weaponized, for you to take that and put a lid on it, you make it 100 times more dangerous. And that's one of the main things when it comes to this type of parts work stuff, which is why this whole unoffendable thing is so important. If you take something that is offensive and actually quite dangerous, if not refined, and you tell it to shut up and that it's bad, and you put into a deep, dark corner, you can guarantee it will hate you. And it will do everything in its power to overpower you so that it can have its day, so that it can have its say, and so that it can be free in the world. Because that's literally its purpose as a part of your being. Its job is to push back against things that are trying to box you in, and things that are trying to take away your agency. Like, that's its job. And when you try to take away the agency of the part of you that's designed to fight back, like, it's not going to go well. It's not going to go well for the people around you.
I've never heard you put it that bluntly, and that registers. This is a good example of, you put something in a certain way and it hits harder. I like we've talked about shadow work and parts work on our podcast, The Nonsenses, which happens most Wednesdays at 5:30 Eastern. But like that, if you respond to the part of you that is asking for this, or that, that wants this, that needs to be recognized in this way, and if you respond to it, no, shut the fuck up, I don't want you in me, I don't want you to be part of this puzzle, it's going to hate you, and it's going to be mad, and it's going to damage you. And that's like, man, I've just experienced so much of that in my life, because there's been phases where I'm trying to get rid of this offensive and ugly, or perhaps not what I'm trying to be perceived as part of me. And if I if I'm successful in stuffing it down, it finds ways to torture me personally.
So I came across this a slightly different way than you did, Chris. So I get a slightly different view. This podcast was a precursor to me discovering parts work, and so something that I've already done with my mindfulness work and my work with dialectical behavior therapy is I've realized that ability to have a range between two extremes is essential to be human. And so I don't always find that the parts that I've judged in myself that have become polarized and split have ended up becoming like violently problematic. But the fact is that any part of the range of being a human, there's going to be times where it's useful and necessary. So there was a time where, and I've used this example before, I have trained I was a martial artist. I've trained to defend myself. And the one thing I didn't expect was for a friend to sucker tackle me one time. And I thought they were a friend. Their mind was that they were a friend. I am kind of attached, at that time I was attached to being a good person. And so I could have, in order to stop him, I could have kicked through his head. I wouldn't have done permanent damage or major damage, but my mind said friend, and I stopped myself. And then it cascaded into a series of events because he had overpowered me. That ended up bad, not just for me, but a few friends in the community. And I had to reevaluate that I had cut off this part of myself that in that situation was justified to cause discomfort to a friend, and know that was not good, but it probably would have been better for multiple people, because this person then took that as a license to be a bully until I stood up to them at a later time. And that was 3 weeks later. So I think it can sometimes be like you press it down and it comes out as a demon, but it could just be that you suppress a part of yourself and it causes problems because you don't act based upon the authentic needs of the situation, because you're trying to be good. You're trying to be one half of the equation and not the other. And that's what happened to me.
And well, there's an interesting, because it's levels of degree that you're talking about here. Like if you never experienced anything that you had to repress with such intense ferocity that it turned against you, then you're lucky, and I'm happy for you.
Oh no, I definitely have. I definitely have.
And when we're talking about the dangers of it, I'm specifically talking about kind of culturally, we're doing that to the most unstable and to the most dangerous people among us. So if you're a pretty healthy guy and you've never turned into a murderous rage, then great. I'm worried about the people that are already on the brink. And if we start repressing them, they're going to explode.
Right. No, I agree. It could go that far. But I'm just saying that sometimes it's more subtle than that. But that entire range is problematic. Oh,
totally. Yeah. Because even before mine turned into a rage monster that tried to kill me, because I was this quintessential guy where I would like have multiple girlfriends in high school and none of them knew about each other, a player, cheater, all sorts of stuff, until I hurt somebody and I repressed that part of me. And it turned me into a weasel. It turned me into like a cowardly, indirect, passive-aggressive weasel who thought he was being the good guy.
This is 2 weeks ago, right? I noticed that. I'm kidding.
And it was only after I reintegrated those parts of my mind that I could feel like I had a genuine sense of honor. And that I could trust my own integrity.
And I think it's coming back to that authenticity. And that authenticity, I think the concept that we've been trying to get at through this podcast is that authenticity can be arranged. That sometimes when people appear to be hypocrites, it's not that they're hypocrites, it's that different things work in different contexts. And you have to have a range. People who are unaware that they hold two different views end up being hypocrites because you can compartmentalize. So people can say, you should never use violence, you should never be angry, but they're going to go out and throw rocks at the police. And they never realize that they're contradicting themselves there, right? Because they're like, well, they're not people, they're police. And that's how that kind of happens. On the flip side, I do think also it's the judgment and the shame and whether it's from religion, whether it's from political movements, whether it's from social movements, we somehow think that judging other people's behavior, judging other people's desires is going to solve that problem. But oftentimes that's what causes people to split, because it sounds like each of us have had experiences in our early life where someone judged one half of who we could be. So we tried not to allow that half to come out. And we each found that that caused problems for us and the people around us. What are you guys' thoughts?
Zach?
Can you simplify the question? I was
So I was saying that, so a big part of why we've been doing Paradialectic is we've noticed that both with our friends who are more on the right and our friends who are more on the left, they've been becoming more judgmental and more kind of judging of one another. And we both kind of saw this as an issue because we realized that our friends in both ends of the spectrum had good and worthwhile points. And it was the conversation that was important, but less people were having that conversation. And I was saying that we've each had it sounds like had times in our life where the people we grew up around, whether it was parents or girlfriends or religion, that we got that we internalized a judgment of one part of how we can be. So whether that's sexuality or being angry or being frustrated or being greedy, these things that we're told we shouldn't be, or maybe even vulnerable or weak at certain times, that it's the fact that we internalized that judgment that ended up causing problems for us and other people.
Well, it was a boil that got lanced by a guy who was obnoxious and aware of what sort of buttons to push for the result of getting all the attention for 4 years. I think you know who I'm talking about. And it's a little rarer in life that you encounter a person at the party who is embodying that. I mean, it happens. Like there's somebody who's like gets all their dopamine from seeing other people ride around in a fence. Mm-hmm. But we just had an experience where we had a head of state who was an offense monster for his own personal gain. And it worked. It worked on all of us. And there was such an extreme thing. Like when I'm thinking about becoming unoffendable is so good for you is that there's a bunch of stuff every day, even if you are in the safest space always and you maintain that bubble. It is impossible to render a lifestyle and a community that is not little bits offensive most of all the time. Like all of the time, there's little things that hit you on certain things, right? And I'm thinking, how much better would it be for the individual, whoever you are and whatever circumstance you're in, to figure out what would have that be hurting you less, because removing the stimuli, I don't think is a good or effective strategy, because that's putting the onus outside of yourself. And every time that you do that, you're now at the whim of how other people are going to show up and behave. And I've just noticed with myself, because there's such a thing as something is warrantedly offensive, right? Mm-hmm. Like there is such a thing as something that is physical violence threatening. We're dealing with this now on the internet. I'm loving Clubhouse now. And now Clubhouse is experiencing a lot of controversy of like somebody was straight up threatening violence and they had to be shut down. Mm-hmm. And then the group that person wants to attach themselves to is like, they're coming after me. They're coming after us. It's like, you said you were going to hurt people, you know? And so like, we're going to experience that in the internet and everywhere. Like, and I think that having a broad rule, like you take it to violence, so that should offend everybody when somebody's being like, I'm going to kill you, or I'm going to kill everyone who's like this. Like that is something that we don't need to be working to be less offended by, but just in terms of stepping on each other's emotions. And, you know, if you're going to a party, we're going to open up ish to some degree here soon, and it's going to still be an offensive world, you know? And I
still don't see any value in being offended. Like, even if somebody's threatening violence, I still don't see any value in getting offended.
Yeah, I was gonna say that actually. The way that I would land that ship is that I'm noticing myself that the less it's an emotional thing for me, somebody fucking up in a way that needs to be addressed or, you know, ostracized, punished in some way, is like I'm actually less effective at being able to deal with those situations when it's coming from a place of I'm hurt and I want to hurt you back. Like I can be cool-headed and be like, you've done something that we can't allow. We can't allow that.
Right. So for me, it's something I always go back to when I taught martial arts, and I would call it to avoid the victim enemy dynamic. That if someone comes up to you and they're trying to, they're being aggressive, and whether they're being physically aggressive, they're being socially aggressive, morally aggressive, intellectually aggressive. There's a lot of ways to be a bully. There's a lot of ways to kind of step on other people's toes. Is that it often brings up fear or anger. Right? And so there's this tendency to either become the enemy or the victim. And you can be in the victim in the short term, like, okay, I'm just going to cower down and take it. But you can also be a victim of like, look, this person hurt me. They are offensive. Like, they're a bad person. Everybody come to my aid. And that's kind of passive aggressive because you're trying to get other people to fight your battle for you. The other thing is you could go toe to toe with them and it could be force against force. But the challenge is either one of those, you're falling into a script created by this attempted offense. It's almost like they're projecting on you and then you're projecting back on them. And now you're in a movie script and you're locked and one of you is going to suffer or both of you are going to suffer. And for me, the idea of being unoffendable means that when that person comes up to me and whether they're attacking me directly with a knife or whether they are trying to like attack my character, that it allows me not to fall into those gutters of enemy or victim. It allows me to go, okay, this person's coming at me. How do I handle this? But how do I do it creatively? And whether that's diffusing it by treating them like a human and shocking them because I'm not attacking back or I'm not acting like I'm attacked, a lot of times that will stop. I found like numerous situations where I hate this word, but I'm going to use it here for sake of time. When I'm not triggered, if I treat the other person like with humor, or I just ask them a personal question, or I just don't get upset and I don't get into a combative stance, they don't know what to do. They're confused. But when I'm triggered, when I'm upset, the game's on. They double down on that attack.
Well, that's the like judo of it. Is that like if people are coming at you, they're coming at you with the expectation that you're going to give them something to push against. And then when you don't give them something to push against, like you either sidestep them or like you just like hug them or something like that,
Right.
And then they just like all that kinetic or potential energy just, it doesn't have anywhere to go. So it like crests like a wave and then it just falls and it's like, well, what was I doing here?
Right. So it comes back to that idea of trauma bonding, right? What happens when you have a trauma bond? It means one person was hurt in one way, and then the other person was hurt in the other way. And they might be amazing people, but because one person suddenly does something that triggers the other person's trauma, and then they attack this person in a way that they were attacked, and now they're locked in this. They know that they care about each other, but they also, there's that primal unresolved script that they've fallen into. And then they also want to like hurt or get away from or resolve this thing, and they don't know how to do it because it's not free will anymore. It's them, each person falling into an old script. And until you can kind of step out of that and break that, it's going to be a hurtful situation for both people.
That makes me think of, and I've waiting for opportunity to talk about this on a podcast, and then lay it to rest. No pun intended. The death of Rush Limbaugh. As soon as that happened, the moment I heard that Rush Limbaugh had died, I was like, here come the memes. People are going to be dancing and spitting on his grave. I hear the loogies being hawked. People hated that guy, and for warranted reasons, because he was outwardly hateful for a career. For decades, he spat on graves. He might have done some dances on some, and so when he died, I was like, there are people who are going to respond with the same level of, and I was waiting for the funny memes, and there were some really, really good ones. There were some really, really funny ones. But it's a good example of when you respond with your emotion from being offended, like you're less effective at dealing with the problem, or even like to turn it as like the left could have dunked on the right so much harder by being the adults who, like, when he died would have just been like, you know what, that guy was really, really mean and wretched, like was very, very verbally awful for a career, but we're not like that. We're going to be the adults. That's not how it went. I'm sure some responded to that, but that's a really good example of like how much more it just works in your favor, whether you're the actual like enforcer, you know, like a security guard. Is it better to get a security guard who's like, don't you fucking do that? Or to get somebody who's cool-headed, like, all right, you fucked up, you got to go. I'm gonna hire the guy who's like who knows the like the levels of engagement, who like knows where it's like, all right, you touched one of the dancers. I don't hate you, but I gotta possibly rough you off, but I gotta get you the fuck out of here, and probably put the boots to you because your hands touch somebody.
I used to work at a nightclub with both kinds of boxers or both kinds of bouncers. The first kind is dangerous as fuck because you drunk people that are like, oh, what, bro? Like, what? And the next thing you know, it's like people bleeding on.
And you've got lawsuits, you got you're risking your liquor license, you've got all sorts of problems, and I guess that's the thing is like if the more that you can resolve these conflicts within yourself, because I mean that's part of what parts work and shadow work is. It's realizing that part of you is judging a part of you, and that if you're afraid of that, you're always worried that someone else is gonna also kind of like get on the side of one of those parts judging the other part, right? And it's almost like this is why drugs work, is that the weed gets you high because you have natural cannabinoids in your body. It fits into that slot. And opiates get you high because you have natural opiates in your body and it fits into that slot. Long as you have this open judgment in one part of yourself, that other person's insult fits into that slot, and it just activates the system, and it hits in the way that other things don't hit you.
And that's what I mean by you can't be offended by things you don't already believe. That's why it's so important, because I love what you said right there, because it's like if somebody says something to me and I get offended, it's like, oh, I must have a voice in me that says the same fucking thing. Otherwise, that wouldn't bother me. Because like if somebody were to call me like a 3-dick leprechaun, it's like, well, that's absurd. That doesn't fit in me anywhere. Right. Like even more human things. Like if somebody were to call me stupid, I'd be like, I'm not stupid. I'm a smart guy. Like that doesn't do anything. I'm just not stupid.
I've got dossiers that suggest that you are a 3-dicked leprechaun.
Okay, well, not in public, dog. And so, but it's when they say something that you're, and it's not even afraid that could be true, because I find this with my clients over and over and over again. People are like, oh, I'm afraid that I'm X, Y, Z. It's like, no, you already believe that, and you're afraid someone will validate it.
Got it.
That's different.
Yeah, I'm going to just sit with this because there's some stuff that I've been afraid of the potential of someone accusing me of a thing or two. But also there's a very there's a very utilitarian thing to me of that. I just see things become such a distraction, and the internet is what I'm not afraid of people in person thinking something of me that's not true. And I'm totally not afraid if I have the opportunity to talk it out with that person. There's someone in my life. But what I am afraid of is when the thing becomes a snowball that's rolling publicly and without my having any ability to stop that fucking rumor that has nothing to do with the truth, you know? And but a personal example of one that I overcame, and I said this earlier in this conversation about how I used to be so worried about being even accused of being a typical, you know, dangerous man who might, you know, be shitty in this or that way. Like now that I know the extent of it, of like that, I am a fucking conscious animal. I do have potentially weaponizable genitals, just physically, but I know that I'm so careful and I'm so self-aware and self-correcting. Like now that I know that I'm like, I don't even think if things became totally fucking Mad Max and there was like total lawlessness, I don't think that I'll ever be somebody who will be any kind of like predatory or violent in a sexual way, you know? And now that I like know that and just like feel that deeply, it's like, yeah, you know, call me a thing if in a personal situation, but I'm still worried about the choruses of judgment and criticism because they run with things.
Well, there's something you just said there that's really interesting to me that would make, to me as a shadow integration practitioner, I'd be like, oh, that's probably why you're still worried about that. Because if you think under those circumstances you wouldn't become that, you're probably denying yourself.
Or let's say
let's try to keep shit together then, man.
so let's kind of go back to the potential of it, right? Because the whole idea of paradialectic. So I used to teach martial arts, and so violence is a taboo subject, and that's literally what I taught. And this is also why I tend to work with veterans with psychology, is because violence is inherent in that. So when it comes to this, I would go to my students roundabout when they get brown belt, right before black belt, and whether they were like, I would do it differently for 8-year-olds than I would for 24-year-olds. But I would go, if you had to defend yourself, what lengths would you go to, and how would you feel about it afterwards? Because the worst thing to do is to train in a martial art where you're learning techniques where you could literally kill somebody, and you're thinking that that's what you're going to do when you're getting into a violent situation, and you find that you're not the sort of person who has that in your repertoire to be able to do, so you hesitate when you could have done something less deadly that could have saved your life, and you get killed. But in some situations, again, if someone's coming at me for a knife, I know I can punch that person in the throat and partially collapse their larynx because they're trying to kill me with a knife. And so I wouldn't hesitate because I've examined that in myself. Now, would I just like walk down the road and like do that to a baby? No. Even again, in a post-apocalyptic world, not going to do it. But I understood the situations in which I could be violent to that degree. So I don't worry about whether the fact that I'm going to be violent that way, because I understand the circumstance is so unimaginably rare that absurd circumstance would have to happen for me to ever act in that way, but I know it's available to me.
Yeah, I like to say that the range for kind of like well-being and like this kind of not having to worry about it is like, I know what I would kill for and I know what I would die for. And those things are substantiated within myself. I'm aware of the range. I'm good with it. Like that generally gives me a sense of like, I know who I am. I know where I'm at. I know my range. I know what's going on. These are my extreme poles. I'm free to go anywhere within them that I need to, but I know if shit hit the fan, I would die for stuff, and I know that I would kill this.
I really don't want things to hit the I don't want things to fit the shan. I would like us to avoid fan shitting. I would like to avoid things shit hitting the fan.
Well, it's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war.
Yeah. That's when I honestly thought, and now I realize how the media was working one over on us, it was so divisive from both sides, and they benefited so much from us being as scared as possible. You know, like there's this talk now of like post-Trump mainstream media is the graphs of their ratings are going way the fuck down because people aren't as scared anymore. They're like, okay, we're back to boring. And they benefited from that scary fucking edge of fucking Civil War, fucking, constantly signaling awful things. Like they benefited from all the sides. If you were in media, particularly mainstream media, particularly blue team mainstream media, you benefited so much from that. And when I realized, when I noticed that there was a real possibility of things becoming like widespread civil unrest, like I started thinking about possibilities of how I may have to respond to that I never wanted to think of, And now that I've seen my range from that, and largely what I found from that I'll admit is like a lot of, I will go to where I and my family are safe. I will get the fuck away from where people are being that way, And now that I know that about myself, it's really good self-awareness at a terrible price. Because God, what a fucking obnoxious 4 years. But it wouldn't have served me better to bring it back to the topic, which I don't know how far I left from that, but how much of an easier time would each of us had if we were unoffendable in 2015, because a whole wave of really offensive stuff was coming.
Well, so here's the thing about that is I think it was an uptick in offense. Suddenly people just started getting really offended by stuff that we've been doing for a long time. Like it was like certain jokes that like everybody was making. It was just totally normal. Suddenly they're completely unacceptable. And the bar that feminism decided to raise suddenly got way higher. And it was like suddenly the range of what was considered offensive seemed to go through the roof. And in my experience, that's why we got Trump in the first place.
Yes, and I agree 100%, Chris. And that's something that I've been trying to warn people about and learning how to talk about for about 7 to 10 years. Because I saw this start like 7 to 10 years ago, where all of the, and to me, what changed was, so I'm in my 40s, and I remember that before there was a social justice movement, there was a multicultural movement. And the idea of the multicultural movement was go and be curious about and explore other cultures. And that was like, I did that. I could practice martial arts. I practiced Zen. I went to legitimate sweat lodge ceremonies run by indigenous people. I was not making light of it. I was not making fun of it. I was experiencing things that I never would have experienced otherwise. And it broadened my perspective and my level of empathy for other human beings. And so I kept doing that. Then one day someone goes, well, that's cultural appropriation. And I hadn't heard that term before. And I'm like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, you're taking someone else's culture. I'm like, what do you mean by taking? They're like, and they explain themselves. And I'm like, part of me was like repulsed. I'm like, wait a minute. If I had not had these experiences, if I was not the only person sitting, the only white guy in like that square mile hanging out with like a bunch of black people, if I wasn't the only white guy in the Chinese restaurant, if I wasn't like going to this experience where I would be more of an asshole, I would be more closed-minded, I would be more afraid. And this is a terrible idea, because you are saying that you can't go out and be curious because if you fuck up, you're a bad person. So what is that person who can't go out and experience other cultures going to do? They're either going to be the nice guy who's inauthentic, or they're going to get angry and they're not going to have empathy. And I think this is exactly what we saw. That to me, the way that we split and polarize ourselves so we're not in touch with these parts of ourselves is through external judgment and trying to be the good person, or getting angry that someone else is trying to make us a certain way. Either one of those will split us.
Yeah, and there's just so much more internal peace to be had from taking the unoffendable route.
Mm-hmm.
Because every single time you get offended, like your adrenaline goes up, cortisol goes up, you can't think straight, ruins your whole fucking day. Like it messes up your relationships. There's so many glaringly apparent problems that come from this constant offended way of being that really just wreaks havoc on people's mental health. And it's like I'm going out on a limb here by saying this, and this is potentially wrong, but I have noticed what looks like a correlation between the more like left-leaning a person is, the more likelihood that they suffer from a lot of anxiety. And it's not a study or anything like that, but generally I just look around and I see who talks about anxiety the most, and they tend to be the people that lean the most left, in my own estimation and my own observation. And if that were to be the case, I would think, like, yeah, keeping all those rules in your head of like how to not be berated, that would make me incredibly anxious.
Well, having an AR-15 can help with anxiety as much as prescription drugs.
But in a way, it kind of does, because so I actually kind of work with this a bit. So I one of the unique things about my job is I work with a wide range of people that people don't normally talk to in their day-to-day life, because everybody comes to me. I'm not seeking these people out, and they're again, I don't like saying this because I haven't done the research, but I do find more of the left-leaning people that I'm working with, I'm actually thinking about this right now, tend towards anxiety, where the more right-leaning tend towards anger. And I think part of this has to do with whether vulnerability is being judged or being a bad person morally is being judged. And I mean socially, morally, right? So people on the right are often wanting to be moral in that they're following rules, often set down by religion or tradition. Whereas if people on the left are being judged for the morality, it's because they're making people around them feel bad.
Which is interesting, because I notice also a correlation between, I'm using archetypal language here. I'm not talking about stuff, but like from an archetypal level, I find that like more feminine things tend to go to the left and more masculine things tend to go to the right.
Yep.
So that means more emotionality to the left.
Mm-hmm.
And that means like care, compassion, virtue, all these sorts of things, versus strength, and personal responsibility and being the provider and stability and all these sorts of things. They're rivaling interests. And so, like, yes, then you're absolutely right about that. And at the same time, there's a lot of neurosis that goes on with the left-hand side of it.
If there is in the right, it just expressed more through anger than with anxiety.
Well, I actually could be, I need your input on this because I don't have the classical training that you used to. I don't categorize anger as neurosis.
So neurosis, I don't tend to use the term neurosis because I don't align myself with psychodynamic approaches. I don't necessarily find them to be, nothing against people who practice psychotherapy in the psychodynamic sense. It doesn't fit my understanding of what's most healing. I'm more concerned, I take more of what's called a transdiagnostic approach. And to me, anxiety and anger and depression are stuck emotions that come from some over-identification with a certain way of reacting to the world, right? So if so a lot of people so anger is one of those emotions where if you judge being vulnerable or happy or silly or embarrassing or shameful or sad, if you judge those as being weak or they mean something bad is going to happen to you, anger is really easy to go to. It can be the emotion that covers up other emotions, as well as the emotion that comes up if someone crosses a boundary or takes something from you. So if it's just what we call a primary emotion, is emotion that's felt from something that happens in the world right now next to you. So that if you only had a primary emotional reaction, if someone comes up and slaps you, you're going to be angry, right? But what happens a lot of times when people are becoming angry because they're judging certain emotional experiences in them. So I might feel vulnerable or sad, and I'm like, well, then I judge myself for being weak. I can't be weak, so now I need to be angry. So that would be what we call a secondary emotional reaction. Anxiety can be a secondary emotional reaction as well. Right?
Yeah, totally. That's been my experience of it. My experience of anxiety was just a collection of highly charged thoughts that I couldn't sort through because they were all fighting for attention inside.
Yes.
That was my experience.
Right.
I could enter the vulnerability Olympics right here and see if this aligns with this topic or what our, because it seems like we have an agreement about that it would be that, or I think we're in agreement about the quote that you said, Seba, that you wouldn't be offended by something unless it's something that you already believe, right? Like that resonates here. I've been feeling, this is my vulnerability Olympics.
Everybody clap.
I've been feeling the societal signals of that I'm 32 years old. I should have a better, money-making career situation. I should be able to show with numbers that I've done things in this world that are of value. Like that used to not bother me because it was like, I know I'm doing things of value. Ask someone. Like ask around. There are people who are like, Zach brings lots of value. Zach is very helpful. Zach is doing something that is more valuable than I know I don't know what the dollar amount would be. But lately, particularly since pandemic, or actually a big part of it is like, since I think I've just nailed it. Since the pandemic, I haven't been doing the thing that I felt most duty bound to do, which is getting people together in person to have weird experiences where we all learn and grow, because it's so novel. And I pride myself in someone who helps facilitate situations where people who don't usually run into each other on the street or don't gravitate towards the same bubbles get together and figure out how to get along and enjoy each other, or at least, coexist. Like, that's something that I felt strongly about with Nonsense Night, of like, this is my service to the world. And not being able to do that for more than a year. No, not more than a year. There was once, but like, it has been a while since that thing where it's once a month. It's this, and it's there for you. And I have felt less like that I'm giving value to the world. And I also have not had, massive income, but I I took unemployment, which I don't want to have, like, I don't think anybody needs to feel ashamed about how they were assisted economically during this time. I think we should have assisted a little bit more, quite a bit more. But anyway, there's obviously something in me that does kind of believe that I've been giving less value to the world because I've felt like a fucking loser. It has been offending the fuck out of me when I get societal signals that I should be further along now. And it wasn't as offensive to me in 2018.
So here's the thing. This is where, so this is the I think this is the dialectic with unoffendability. So when we become more open to both voices within us, when we have two sets of voices on a topic, we're less likely to be offended from something outside of us. So I find it sometimes useful for part of me to offend the other part of me and listen to it. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm kind of like, so I truly, one of my deep values is to be active. I love to be around active people. I love to hike. It's something that makes me come alive. So when, like, partway through the pandemic, I kind of looked at myself and go, I'm getting a little bit of a belly here. Like, I have a little more weight than I had like a month ago. I'm glad that I'm offending myself. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be shame-free. I want to go to that part of myself and go, dude, you're fucking right. Like, because you're representing the fact that I want to be out on a mountain. You're representing the fact that when I don't work out, my fucking broke ass knees hurt worse. Mm-hmm. And if I keep going on this path, I'm going to go more in the direction I don't want to go. So thank you to myself for insulting me, because I want to be insulted and I want to do it from a friend. It's like, I want my friends to stab me in the front. If I have a friend or I'm doing something stupid, I don't want my friend to talk about that behind my back to another friend. They're like, yeah, Eric's doing that thing. I want him to come up to me like, dude, what the fuck are you doing? And I'm like, oh, fuck, you're right. So I want that same relationship with these parts of myself, which is another reason why this whole idea that we shouldn't be upset by people around us, it bothers me. Because if part of me does care that I'm gaining a little weight, it doesn't mean that I care if the other person on the other side of the screen is gaining weight. Because if you're happy at any shape or size or level of fitness, those are your values. They're your values, and you need to own them. My values are, I want to be active. So that voice in me is going to come up and dog me when I'm not living that way. And that's okay.
That's so good. Like, cause that's one of the things I talk to my clients about a lot, because this comes up a lot, because they have this like thing that occurs to them as a bully, but it's actually, that's you saying that, like, hey, you're not doing the things that you care about. And so after we get a little bit of peace with it, it's like, dude, just imagine if you didn't have that. Like, how much worse your life would be if you didn't have an alarm that goes off in your head to tell you that you're not being who you want to be. Mm-hmm. Like, if you didn't have that, nobody would actualize.
Right.
And so it's important.
So the part of the reason why I've gained this weight is I've been working 60, 70 hours a week. I haven't had the time or the energy to put into it. So I'm not a bad person, because this part of me is like, hey, dude, let's get back to it. It's there because I needed to be that way for a while. The other side of me was like, we can put this on the back burner. You don't need to work out all the time, because if I was compulsively working out, that wouldn't be any good either. Mm-hmm. It's allowing that give and take and that flexibility as my circumstances adjust. So Zach, I'm like, I guess the question would be like, that part of you that does value money, that does value being productive in that way, like, what's the good part of that? Like, what's useful about that?
Well, I've learned the other side of values, if you want to break things down, not even left, right, just like, I used to be, all of my turduckens were in one, in fucking wherever you put turduckens. I don't know where people let their turduckens roam, but like, I had all of mine in one coop, which was art, and that I'm authentic, and that I'm sincere, and that I'm, that I express emotions, that I'm like prolific, and I'm when I was more prolific, like going places and getting people together and all that. And now I'm left here and I only have myself and my fucking, to look at my bank account or my like to just now that it's just that it's I have so much of the lens just on myself and my progress, and I don't am I taking care of me? I guess is that have I and was I all those years taking care of me? I had like, such an idea that I was this social thing and this social experience, and my time spent in isolation has shown me that it is good to have a value of taking care of myself. And you know, there's some things that could certainly be improved about this economic and political system we got going here. But there's also a really great thing that I notice now, which that it is possible to climb, and there's certainly no excuse for someone like me who was raised by two parents who stayed together enough to bring us to term as adults before divorcing. I had all of the ingredients needed to build myself up, and I used to just scorn that as a value. It's just like it's all about being, and it is still like more important to me to be a person who is personally fulfilled. But now it's actually a thing that I would be personally fulfilled if I could figure out a way to turn my skills into a career. But more so, just
I imagine it'd be more fulfilling if you weren't broke when you get old.
Yeah.
Yeah, this was a thing for me as well. Like I did what I loved for most of my life. I ran a martial arts studio, and I went to Burning Man 12 times, and I went to grad school for a long period of time when grad school does not pay much at all. And then I found myself in a situation where I'm like, wow, I am way behind. I'm way behind. And that impacts my freedom and my ability to be creative. And those are things that I care about. So I realize that if I want to have this sort of freedom that I want to have going into my like 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and if I want to be able to be creative that late in life, if I don't get my financial situation together, I'm going to be like working my butt off at 70 and not being able to like I'm going to have less energy, I'm going to have less time. I better kind of catch up now. And I think that push, it's a good one. And so by kind of like teaming up with that, I've been having fun with this part of myself that I didn't think could be fun. I thought it was, I realized that you can be just as creative making money, just as about like solving puzzles, making money, as you can like creating artwork. And you can use that money to help you create artwork. Like it doesn't have to be this either or. So.
Yeah, I see it as a canvas now, and that's probably why I was more like I was offended by a fucking YouTube comment of somebody who was pretty much saying like he said about that he actually must be listening to these podcasts because he said, oh, I mentioned that I have a Patreon, or I was making a post about like making a Patreon poll, and Patreon, for those of you listening in 2074, if Patreon still doesn't exist because the CEO recently announced that it's not a sustainable business, is a way for artists and creators and people doing things in the world to pretty much lay out a hat where people can consent to be wiring you $1 or $5 or $20 a month.
So does that mean you're going to start an OnlyFans instead?
Yeah, I mean, and OnlyFans gives value as well. You're giving value. You're giving your naked appearance. However, I've heard that it's not all sex. I should look into OnlyFans. Maybe I should look into OnlyFans. Anyway, and it was just somebody commented, oh, the Mustang. He said, Bitcoin didn't make enough for you there, Mustang boy. Biden's America is sickening me, you know? Like he was pretty much saying like that the wealth you're pretty much calling me a welfare queen. Like and he said that he knew that I had a Mustang and that I was interested in or had invested in Bitcoin ever so slightly. And that actually struck me in that moment because there was a part of it that I believed because I've been feeling like a loser because I'm upset that in those at some point in those 32 years I didn't find a way to make one of my skills lucrative. I just didn't. I know I did find one way to make one of my skills lucrative, which was getting people together to have events. But then when that was swooped away, I did not quickly snap into gear to find another way to make money doing creative. I've been taking boxes full of pillows out of a semi truck for capitalism. I do not feel strongly about that. So when someone called me a loser, to bring it to the topic, when someone called me a loser now, when I've actually been feeling really wounded in that area, I was like, oh, fuck, I'm not of that. And I like defended myself and I fucking got it. And I still don't feel well about this right now. And so one of the way for me to work on it myself and become unoffendable is to fix those things that I am truly insecure about. I do not feel good about how much of a case there is that I have not figured out a way to play the game.
So I think this kind of brings us back to an earlier topic, and whether it's sexuality or money or aggressiveness or someone being slutty or like someone like being sensitive in certain ways, there is a big difference between being good and being authentic. And I think that the only way to be authentic and live by your values is to spend time getting to know yourself. And I think mindfulness is a path for this. And I think that this self-work, these self-conversations is a path for that. Because the hardest thing about being mindful is you have to sit with yourself. And people are like, I can't meditate. And I'm like, why? Because when I sit down, my mind's racing and I feel really uncomfortable and I can't clear my mind. I'm like, that's working. That's what mindfulness is. That literally is your self-relationship right now. And if you can't sit with yourself for 5 minutes because you don't like what your mind's doing, that is the diagnosis. That is the Rorschach test. And that is the thing that you need to come into. You need to come into an understanding with yourself. Because this is the difference. Because as long as you're trying to be good, you're going to be fake.
Yeah. Sanchez says sometimes authentic is evil, which there's a
Yeah,
whole.
Sanchez is already back with the bangers.
So Sanchez, can you expand on that? What do you mean by authenticity as being evil? I guess
sometimes I saw a
authentic. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I saw a TED Talk that explained this very well, where it was this woman who had interviewed. She had worked with a psychopath who had murdered people, and
he would be authentically evil. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, her conclusion was that he was being authentic when he killed people.
Right.
And that it would have done him well to rein in that authenticity.
Well, so that's the danger, I think, because like when we talk about authenticity, I think I'm assuming you guys mean the same thing I do. I think there's a lack of distinction in language in that. I mean like the integrated version of authenticity.
Yes.
I don't mean impulsive. I don't mean just doing whatever comes to your mind and just doing 100%. That. I mean like the well-integrated version where like the most authentic self with a capital S is coming. That's what I mean by that.
So something I do a lot. It's part of acceptance and commitment therapy is on one hand mindfulness, and the other half is values work, values clarification. And values clarification is understanding what is important to you or what could be important to you in each of the areas of your life. So if you just want to break it down to 4 categories, we've got relationships, we've got growth and development, we've got spirituality, and we've got there's other ones, right? If you're only looking at one of those areas and you're looking at like growth and development or financial success, and that's the only way you're authentic, well, you're going to be imbalanced and you're going to hurt yourself and other people. But I do values work with people who are literally sociopathic, that they don't have a conscience. And when this person is able to look at their full life in a broad, mindful way, this is going to sound really strange, a person doesn't need to have a conscience in order to interrelate with people around them in a non-harmful way. In fact, there was a scientist who realized he was a sociopath as he was developing a test for psychopathy. Have you heard of this guy? I wish I remembered his name.
He's like studying the brain scans, and then he scanned his own, and he's like, holy shit.
I'm a sociopath, right?
Yeah.
But what he realized is he had such a broad view of himself in the world, he wasn't acting in ways that were normally harmful to other people because he had this balanced view. He didn't need to have this conscience in order to do that. But if you take a sociopath and you hurt them, you judge them, they're split in the way that we've been talking about, and they start to become that enemy or that victim, and they get into that cycle, that person is to be narrowly focused in their own mind and therefore highly destructive to the people around them. So yeah, I'm on the same page with you, Chris. That authenticity has to be in this kind of broad, full spectrum awareness of yourself. It can't be caught up in this reactivity.
Yeah, and I think you point to something really interesting there, which I didn't know you get to work with people like that. Like that's fucking fascinating to me. Like, that was, if I were to ever go to school, it would be for that exact reason. That's so fascinating to me. And it makes me think, because like my whole theory on this is that like I really like Hermetic philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Hermetic philosophy is the one that states like as above, so below,
Yep.
so within, so without. And the idea for me is that like if we were to become unoffendable, and if we were to genuinely integrate all these different parts of ourselves that are hurt, in order to do that, you have to be loving with them. You have to be kind with them, or else they won't integrate. And so what ends up happening is you have a natural love, understanding, and compassion for the people that might trigger them in you.
Yes.
And so you start to realize that as you become more whole, integrated, and unoffendable, that you just don't really have any interest in hurting people anymore, because you realize that you cannot hurt anyone without hurting yourself. And so it just stops being a good idea because it hurts. And so I don't do things that hurt anymore.
I came to that realization with lying. I realized long before parts work in my 20s, I am very verbally skilled. So if I want to lie and manipulate, I could. And I realized that when I lied in my 20s, in my teenage years, that I ended up with more blind spots in myself. Because in order to carry out a lie, I had to act inside of myself. And one of my highest values is to know myself, to be self-aware. So the second I start to lie to people around me, I get cut off from parts of myself. So there's been times later in my life where I've been in a situation where I was ashamed of something I did, so I lied about it for a while, and I always had to come back and be honest again, because I realized if I wasn't, it was going to become a feedback loop that was going to fuck up my life. And so both on a moral end, I don't like the feeling of lying, being manipulative. I don't like how that feels in me. And on the other end, I also realize it creates a feedback loop that fucks up my life. And so I avoid that at all costs. Not at all costs, at most costs.
We are at 10 minutes away from the end of this program, and I would like to ask you both about the concept of fragile versus robust versus an anti-fragile system, because I think that's what we're talking about here. And I wanted to say that, like, why I like this topic and why I think it's very important is that I myself as an individual, and I see so many who would benefit so much from being less hurtable, because this world is fucking full of hurt.
Yeah.
You know? So, Chris, you're good at this. What is a fragile system versus an anti-fragile versus a
Yeah, so it's based on this book called Anti-Fragile. I forget the name of the author. I don't remember. But it's this idea.
Taleb something.
Yeah, Taleb. Yeah. So it's this idea that there's three different types of systems. There's fragile systems, robust systems, and anti-fragile systems. This ashtray is a fragile system because if I apply stress to it, it'll shatter. Whereas a big boulder is a robust system because I can apply a lot of pressure to it and it'll stay the same. Whereas psychologically, what we're talking about here is an anti-fragile system is a system that gets stronger as you apply pressure. And so if you offend me, if you call me names, and I choose to deal with the part of me that resonates with that, I become stronger as a result. And so I become anti-fragile. The more psychological pain you try to inflict on me, the more I turn it into strength and the stronger I become. And so it's kind of like Mega Man killing the bad guys and then he gets their powers. It's like, yeah, try and hurt me, I'm just going to get stronger.
It's Nassim Nicholas Taleb, by the way.
Thank you.
Author of Anti-Fragile. Yeah.
So for me, I like to kind of maybe look at practical, because we can talk about an idea, but I think a lot of what we've been trying to kind of keep coming back to is how do we do this? So the first thing that helped me become more resilient was mindfulness work and values work separately from one another, and then eventually together in acceptance commitment therapy. That before I found mindfulness, I was more reactive to the world around me. And what mindfulness really helps you do is it helps you step back from that automatic judgment, reactivity, and habitual response that you can get caught up in. And now what's new is that took me so far. But when I discovered this parts work accidentally this summer, and I'm still along that path, like I am still actively doing a lot of that work in me because I've got 4 decades of history behind me. and I've only been doing this for 6 months, and I'm continually finding new ways to become more resilient by kind of doing the work that we've been talking about here. And like I noticed myself when I was talking about the person who was accusing me of that cultural appropriation, I noticed myself kind of getting that adrenaline that that offendability. I was like re-offended for myself. I'm like, oh, this is happening here. And that kind of points me to a place where I still have work to do. And I'm kind of excited to dive into that a bit. So I guess a little tangential to what you asked, but I always like to bring the practical piece in.
Yeah, like I get excited to get stronger. You know, it's like, sure, offend me, say whatever the fuck you want. And there's like this other thing that we haven't talked about, and then we don't have a lot of time, but I think it's really important, and I think it's a bigger deal than it might seem, is that like my closest friends are the people I talk the most shit to.
Yes.
The closer we are, the more terrible shit I'm going to say to you.
Right.
And I don't want to live in a world where that's not the case.
Yes.
I don't want to live in a world where I'm constantly walking on eggshells. Like, I want to say the worst things to you. Like, my dad died when I was 7. My closest friends make fun of me for it, and it's hilarious. They tell me all kinds of jokes, and we laugh about it. I laugh about their shit. And it sets you free when you can laugh about things and when you can joke about things with friends and they're not sensitive anymore. It's like, it's liberating.
And a good example of how I am about offensiveness is that although publicly I will not make a "ha your dad died" joke about Chris Orozco, in a private conversation or when we hang out in person next, I'm going to go in.
You may have, actually. You may have in the past.
Now here's the thing. For me, I actually like the full range. So I've got friends I know that if I am, like, I'm a very empathetic person, I'm a very emotional person, I'm a very sensitive person, which is why I practice mindfulness, because I need it. I needed it to live the sort of life that I was living. And so I really appreciate the friends that I can go to where I know first and foremost they're going to care and they're going to be there in this way. But I also make sure I surround myself by assholes who are going to call me out and go, dude, that's fucking stupid. They're going to go, what the fuck are you doing? They're like, grow the fuck up. And I want that and I need that because, again, I want that relationship within myself, and as without that, going back to the hermetic thing, I want the full range. I want that loving, caring, compassionate aspect of myself. And I want that part of myself that's going to kick my ass and make me work harder and push me to do that thing that I was afraid to do, because that's one of the best parts of life, you know?
And I want both in me and I want both in my friends.
Yes.
I had a great conversation about this today because we had both sides present. I had my friend who, she made it very clear she absolutely does not play the game where we bust each other's balls and we playfully insult each other. And then I had my friend Billy Mays the third, and he and I will go hard on that sometimes, you know. and we really got to explain, and there was others in the room who came from different places about this. Like in British culture, it's a big thing, taking the piss out of each other. You know, we say busting balls, and what I think is going on there, why it's such a special thing that not everybody speaks the language, is that for me, it's such a thing of intimacy when we break each other's balls. Because if you can say horrendous things, you know, to me, and I know that you're kidding because I know that you love me, and I know that you respect me, and you know that I'm not going to be, what was that? You know, and I'm not saying that it's not respectable or that it's a bad thing to be offendable in that way, but to me it shows the strength of our relationship and of our like where we've come in our conversation, where it's like, yeah, but I also love friendships. I know how to be sensitive for somebody who doesn't play that game. I think it's pretty obvious to be able to tell. And that's the thing, is like, you want, back to the dialectic of like, work on becoming unoffendable, but also like, it's not like a completely lost cause to make the world less like just hellaciously insensitive, or to be completely insensitive yourself. Like, I work on being less just like stomping around being a fucking asshole, you know, like, but when I'm in a closed bubble with people that I know that we play that way, and that's how we hang out, and that it's actually this bonding thing, we go hard as fuck. And I actually would like us to continue to push the envelope. And if anything ever does happen where a dear friend is fucking with me and it offends me, then the way I want to be now is, what's going on there? Like that actually hit for some reason. There must be something that I'm insecure about.
And I always would say in the martial arts, it's better to be hit by a friend who respects you than the random guy in the bar, right? Mm-hmm. So the other thing here is that this is something that I've been doing a lot of work with, working with veterans, is that most psychology is developed for and with well-to-do women. And the problems of well-to-do women are different, and the ways of behaving are different for well-to-do women than they are for men.
That means successful? You mean successful?
Yeah. So we say high SES. So most of psychological studies are done at universities. And most people in psychology departments where these studies happen are women. And so we're developing an entire system, an entire science based on a fairly small demographic. And there's people who try to do this outside of that demographic, but actual clinical studies tend to be done in women. So we focus on how do you treat anxiety and depression in white 20-something, 30-something, middle-class women. And so when the average white middle-class woman is depressed, validating her feelings is going to be what's validating. But I have to take trainees who have been very sheltered, who are now working with war veterans, and if they try to go in and validate them the way that you would validate Tiffany, who's 24 and just had her first breakup, so they're like, you're bullshitting me. They will literally call out the trainee and be like, what the fuck? And then I'm like, you need to be direct. You need to be blunt, because you're showing them respect by showing them that you can take the interpretation. And so I had a trainee who went in and did this, and the guy comes back like, fuck yeah. That's what I'm talking about. Like, hit me again. Because he was validated because she showed enough respect to him to be blunt with him. Mm-hmm. And I think this is what we miss when we're trying to make this culture bubble wrapped and where everybody's validating each other in one specific way, because how fucking arrogant that you can't show validation by insulting somebody. Mm-hmm. How fucking arrogant to deny that exists. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I guess we can end on that one.
I trust people more when they do that. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, oh, cool. Like, we could just be people.
Right.
Like, great, yes. I'm free. I don't have to worry about you. You don't have to worry about me. Like, cool, great, let's get along. It'll be great. I can just relax. Whereas if somebody's easily offendable, it's like, boy, it's going to be a lot of work to be around you. I don't know what the triggers are going to be, and I don't want to find them, and I don't, like, okay, here we go. Mm-hmm. Whereas if I know I can mess with you, then it's like, all right, what do you want to do today?
Yeah, it's another take on emotional safety. Like when people say safe spaces, like when I'm at this work with the unloading of the boxes full of pillows from a semi truck, which are actually quite heavy. This wound on my face, that one of them fell and fucking the corner of it hit me in the face.
Dangerous. Are you working for the My Pillow guy?
But the men that I work with at this fucking lifting heavy shit fucking job, like for them, it would be an emotionally unsafe like move of me to be sensitive with them. Like it would make them fucking uncomfortable. Like there are some fucking brute dudes, and it's not all dudes. Like there are some people. There are plenty of women where if you're all sensitive with them, they're like, fucking that. It's offensive. It's like, what do you think? You think I can't fucking hack? You know. Mm-hmm. So there's very different ways in which people get offended. I know some people that I love the living fuck out of, who it would offend them to be too sensitive with them, because like you said, Rick, it immediately it occurs to them that like you're gesturing that you think I'm weak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it reminds me of this time I was with my friend Tarek, and we were at the Japanese Disneyland in Tokyo, and I was having a really good time with him, and I was like, bro, you're the fucking best, and he just like gave me this like look, what the fuck are you talking about? I was like, oh wait, never mind, fuck you, I hate you. And then he's like, oh, okay, cool, all right, we're good.
Right. You can't, that idea about being uncomfortable with people who are easily offended. Like you have to be so much more on, and it's hard for you to be authentic when you're always worried about someone else getting hurt by you just being human. Like you can't waltz in a minefield. You can't do it.
I do find that I grow from putting myself just in radically different situations and sometimes formulating myself to different ways. Like I find I get into the nooks and crannies of the human experience and the human nature sometimes by going to either extreme in all sorts of places. So, but yeah, as in a general sense, I personally do prefer having people around me who are not who know that who know that they don't got to worry about offending me.
So I think we really have to have that balance. One of my biggest pet peeves is therapists who validate without reality checking. It's absolutely fucking destructive. And that means that, oh, what you're feeling is valid. What you're feeling is valid, and what you're thinking is valid, and that's okay, over and over again. Because when you do that with people who they mistake emotional validation for approval of their behavior, and they're behaving horribly, you're creating monsters. You're hurting them. You're like, their life is becoming worse. So what I do is I talk a lot about, it's like an 80-20 rule. Like 80% of the time, I'm truly being validating because they're human and they deserve validation, they deserve compassion and love. But 20% of the time, I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? and as long as it's 80-20, people can usually hear it, right? But if I'm not occasionally going to my clients like, you did what? Because I know it's going against their personal values, that people have blind spots, and that's how you help them see. And that's, again, what I hope my friends do that. I like the whole 80-20 thing. I want to know that they love me, but I also want them to know that if I'm being really stupid, they're going to give me a chuck on the shoulder, you know?
All right, guys, this has been awesome, but I have to get going. Thank you so much for this fantastic conversation.
Okay, cheers, guys. Good seeing you, Chris.
You broken-hearted coward. Take her easy. You shattered human who will never pick up the puzzle pieces of your soul. Bye.
I'll do my.
So, I think that was a good episode.
Yeah. This has been good. I think that we said a lot of the things. As always with any dialectic. However, would you call this a dialectic, or would you call this us trying to run home a point?
No, I think this was a dialectic because it comes back to the whole reason why we did this was this idea of these extremes within us. And if we don't take in both of the extremes, like if we're not literally doing the parts work, which we're kind of looking at what's that compassionate part of myself want, and what does that part of me that wants to just smack my friend right now, what does that part want? Like, if we're not having a conversation between that within ourselves, we're not being real, we're not being authentic, and we're going to be easily offendable, and we're going to offend other people, right? Because again, I think people who are overly nice are offensive, right? And I think people who don't give a fuck are also offensive. So it's that range. I think it fits.
I think overly sensitive people, I wouldn't call offensive that it is, but I will say this: I guard myself. Like, I'll straight up say, I guard my heart from getting too close with people who are too offensible.
Did I say too? I meant too nice.
Yeah, and I would say too nice to the point where I know you must be lying is
right.
I am offended by that,
and I think that's, again, in the areas of my life where I'm afraid of being a bad person. I have been too nice, and when that changed, people came to me like, dude, yeah, you felt a little inauthentic there, and I'm like, fucking thank you. How was I inauthentic? Because I'm still working through this shit. And I think that I'm an authentic person in most times, but now doing this parts work, doing this shadow work, when I notice myself trying to be good, I realize that part of myself is bullshitting part of myself and the people around me. And so I try to fucking get at that as soon as I can.
Yep.
So what did we, so we're going to meet again in 2 weeks.
Oh, I had a real fucksy daisy of a thing that I wanted to talk about, but can I
we can chew on this. We can announce it later.
Can I pull it up right now? Yeah, I am very interested right now in talking about the future of work, and I know that there's dialectics in there. You know, like the question of if/when artificial intelligence take all of our jobs and drudgerous work is no more. Also, if there's some UBI situation where there isn't the pit of poverty is no longer threatening everyone. Like, those are two ways that I think that both will happen. Like, what are we going to do? There's some dialectics in there about, like, what I just talked about earlier. Like, when personally myself, when I am not being in service to a community and to others, I start to feel real bad about myself. And it's not because, and it's not the money. I'm not feeling bad because there's less money in my bank account than would be satisfactory. It's because I don't feel like I'm contributing, and I start to feel like I'm not being who I could be. It makes me feel
not being productive. You're not acting on the stuff that you care about. So yeah, we can talk about the future of finance and the future of work.
Something, and there's some verses in there, like drudgery versus meaningful service, like because
persistence.
Because one is like, because you can be doing a drudgerous job that you hate that is paying you well, and you're being fulfilling because you're a family person and you're providing for a family, and that's meaningful.
What you can do with the money that comes from the drudgery is the source of meaning, but it's also possible to have both meaning and be financially rewarded if you can find the right path, the right work. Yeah,
so maybe that's it, unless something else pops up. But this has been great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, great.
All right. Well, take care, everybody. It's a fucking dodgy, offensive world out there. So I hope that everybody
fucks off and deals with it.
Yeah, to some degree, or evades the parts of it that you don't like. But good luck with that. All right. Bye.
Cheers, everybody.
Happy reality.